A political thriller, expanded edition. Prologue, a fire that couldn't be contained, Washington, D.C. October 2024. The glow of the Capitol dome, usually a beacon of hope, flickered ominously against the rain-slicked streets. Inside her office, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the firebrand congresswoman known simply as AOC, sat alone. The room felt colder than usual, the silence amplifying the thumping in her chest. The only light emanated from the television screen, casting her face in a stark, unflattering glow. On the screen, the relentlessly even tones of a news anchor shattered the illusion of normalcy. Breaking: AOC indicted for corruption. $95 million in stolen NYC traffic funds. AOC's fingers, usually drumming a restless rhythm on her desk, clenched around the chair's armrests, knuckles white. The words felt like a physical blow. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, once hailed as the progressive future of American politics, now faces multiple federal charges. The investigation, led by former Trump official Kash Patel, alleges a vast financial fraud operation that funneled taxpayer money into her campaign's shadow accounts. Her pulse hammered in her ears. This can't be happening. This wasn't just a smear campaign orchestrated by right-wing media. This was a meticulously planned assault, a knife twisting in the dark. This was war, and she was losing. Badly. The anchor continued, detailing the charges, the evidence, a litany of accusations that seemed surreal, impossible. The weight of it settled on her like a shroud. She reached for her phone, but her hand froze inches away. Who could she trust? Who had betrayed her? The questions clawed at her, each more agonizing than the last. The screen flashed to a panel of legal experts, their faces somber, their pronouncements dire. The progressive dream, it seemed, was about to crumble. AOC stared at the screen, a mixture of disbelief and cold fury hardening her gaze. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of the fight. She wouldn't go down without a battle, even if it meant exposing the darkest secrets of the very system she had sworn to reform. Part 1. The Rise and Fall. Chapter 1. The Whisper Campaign. Begins 6 months earlier, Bronx, New York. The re-election campaign should have been a victory lap. The energy was electric, the grassroots support unwavering. Banners emblazoned with AOC fighting for you draped across storefronts. Fundraising events were packed, the air thick with hope and the promise of progress. Her team had meticulously planned every detail, endorsements from key figures, vibrant grassroots events, and a cutting-edge digital outreach strategy. The polls showed her leading by double digits. Victory felt inevitable, almost boring. Then the whispers began. It started subtly, a dissonant note in the otherwise harmonious symphony of her campaign, a snide remark at a town hall meeting, an anonymous comment on a news article, a shadow flickering at the edge of the light. Then came the leak. A leaked memo marked confidential from the New York Department of Transportation. The memo, sent anonymously to several investigative journalists, raised alarm bells. Its dry bureaucratic language couldn't mask the explosive implications. Major financial discrepancies in the 2020 NYC Traffic Infrastructure Fund. $95 million unaccounted for. Internal audit initiated, but findings inconclusive. Further investigation recommended. At first, no one cared. Government waste was as pervasive as the city's relentless noise. A few articles appeared, quickly fading into the background hum of daily news. It was just another instance of bureaucratic ineptitude, easily dismissed. Then came Kash Patel. The former Trump official, a legal pit bull with a reputation for aggressive tactics and unwavering loyalty to his former boss, had political vendettas to settle. Ocasio-Cortez had been a vocal critic of the Trump administration, a constant thorn in their side. Patel saw this as an opportunity to cripple her, to settle the score once and for all. Patel established a private investigative team, staffed with forensic accountants and seasoned investigators. They began to meticulously trace the missing funds, navigating an intricate web of PACs, nonprofits, and shell companies, their digital footprints deliberately obscured. And at the center of it all, alarmingly, disturbingly, was AOC's political machine. Connections, contributions, and transfers seemed to lead inexorably back to her campaign. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. The shadow loomed closer. Chapter 2. The Denial Strategy. AOC's campaign scrambled to respond. The initial reaction was dismissive, a knee-jerk defense against what they perceived as a politically motivated attack. The playbook was familiar: counterpunch, frame the narrative, rally the base. And so, within hours of the first report surfacing, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood before a sea of supporters at a hastily arranged rally in the Bronx, the city lights flickering against the twilight sky. "This is a right-wing witch hunt, plain and simple," she declared, gripping the podium with both hands as though bracing for a storm. Her voice, rich with conviction, echoed through the crowd, layered with the same defiance that had carried her from bartender to congresswoman. "They're trying to silence us, to stop our progress." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices rising in a deafening chant of solidarity. AOC, AOC, AOC. The rhythmic energy surged through the streets, drowning out the pockets of protesters scattered beyond the rally's perimeter. The air pulsed with the electric charge of a movement unwilling to back down. But beneath the veneer of confidence, cracks had begun to form. Inside the dimly lit confines of her campaign headquarters, the mood was starkly different. The air was heavy, charged with a tension that clung to the walls. A massive whiteboard stood covered in frantic scribbles, timelines, damage control strategies, media talking points, none of which provided a clear escape route from the crisis unfurling around them. "Alex, this isn't just Fox News," said Jordan Rivera, her campaign manager, his voice taut with barely restrained anxiety. A veteran of political warfare, Jordan was her anchor in the roughest waters, the strategist who never flinched. Yet tonight, a shadow of unease flickered in his sharp brown eyes. CNN, The Washington Post, The Times, they're all on this. And it's not speculation anymore. They've got sources, documents, things we can't ignore. Across the room, her attorney, Mark Feldman, leaned forward, his expression grim. He had seen political scandals before. He had cleaned up more than his share of messes. But this was different. He exhaled slowly, placing a thick file on the table, its contents an unsettling weight between them. "They have bank records," he said flatly, his voice devoid of theatrics. "Leaked emails, forensic audits." He paused, his steely gaze locking onto hers. "This is serious, Alex. We need to take it seriously." For a moment she was silent, the weight of their words pressed against her, cold and relentless. Then she scoffed, tossing her hair over her shoulder with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Come on, Mark," she said, forcing a smirk. "You know how these guys operate? It's a smear job, just like always. They don't have anything real." But even as she spoke, a sliver of doubt sliced through her certainty. The room was too quiet. Her team, normally quick to affirm her instincts, remained still, exchanging nervous glances. It wasn't just political theater anymore. This wasn't some routine media attack that would fade in a 24-hour cycle. This had teeth. For the first time, a cold knot twisted in her stomach. Fear. It tasted bitter, unfamiliar, and it wasn't going away. Chapter 3. The FBI Moves. In the subpoena arrived 2 weeks later, encased in a stark white envelope that bore the unmistakable seal of the Department of Justice. It wasn't delivered by mail, nor by a courier, but by a federal agent, tall, broad-shouldered, and unsmiling, his presence alone a silent declaration that the game had changed. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood in her office as Jordan received the document, his fingers tightening around the thick paper, as though bracing for impact. The room, once buzzing with the hum of campaign operations, fell eerily silent. The agent didn't linger. He simply handed over the subpoena, nodded curtly, and left, his polished black shoes clicking against the floor as he disappeared down the hallway. Jordan exhaled sharply, unfolding the letter with the care of a man defusing a bomb. He read it once, then again, before passing it to Mark Feldman. The lawyer's expression remained unreadable as his eyes scanned the page, but the slight twitch in his jaw betrayed his concern. "This isn't a request," he muttered. "This is a dragnet." The subpoena demanded all campaign financial records, every email, every phone log, an exhaustive list that stretched far beyond standard inquiries. But the most alarming part? The explicit mention of the New York City Traffic Infrastructure Fund. That fund, a key pillar of AOC's platform, had always been a source of scrutiny. Now, the FBI was making it clear they were hunting for something. For the next 2 weeks, the war room became a pressure cooker. Staffers pored over spreadsheets, combing through financial records, desperately searching for anything that could be twisted into a smoking gun. Sleep was a luxury no one could afford. Anxiety crackled in the air like static, tightening its grip on every person in the office. Then, the raid happened. It was just after dawn when the agents arrived, silent phantoms in dark windbreakers, stepping out of unmarked SUVs as the first hints of sunlight kissed the skyline. Their movements were sharp, coordinated, efficient. Before the city had fully awakened, they had swarmed the campaign headquarters in the Bronx. No warning, no courtesy call. They sealed off the block, locking down the building before the first confused staffer even realized what was happening. Some were still clutching their coffee cups as they were ordered to step away from their desks. Aides exchanged panicked glances, frozen in disbelief, as agents moved methodically through the office, confiscating laptops, seizing hard drives, collecting boxes of documents. AOC had seen raids like this before, but always from a distance, as headlines, as cautionary tales of politicians brought to their knees. Now, she was living it. From a high-rise balcony across the street, a reporter live-streamed the scene. News helicopters hovered above like vultures, capturing every second of the spectacle. By midday, the footage was viral. The image of federal agents storming her headquarters, grim-faced, authoritative, spread like wildfire. Cable news networks ran the clips on repeat, their voices dripping with the thrill of scandal, breaking FBI raids, AOC campaign office and criminal probe. And then came the numbers. Within hours, her poll numbers nosedived. The months of careful messaging, the grassroots energy, the momentum she had so meticulously built, gone. Just like that. As she watched the headlines pile up, a slow, crushing realization settled in. This wasn't just a bad news cycle. This was a reckoning. Chapter 4. The Public Turns. AOC sat in her apartment, the curtains drawn tight, shutting out the relentless city that had once been her stage. The glow of her phone screen was the only light in the room, illuminating the exhaustion etched into her face. The world outside buzzed with life, but inside these walls, everything felt still. Too still. She scrolled through Twitter, her thumb moving with mechanical precision, as an endless wave of outrage flooded her feed. The backlash was no longer just from her usual detractors. These were different voices, ones she recognized, ones she had relied on. People who had once championed her cause were now dissecting every word she had ever spoken, every tweet she had ever posted. Screenshots of her old statements resurfaced, stripped of context, twisted into accusations. The slogans that had once inspired a movement were now used against her. Hold the powerful accountable. No one is above the law. The irony stung. Her notifications were a battlefield. Betrayal from former supporters, gloating from political enemies, and, worst of all, the silence from those she had once considered allies. The initial outcry, the defensive wall of witch hunt and fake news, had begun to crumble. In its place there was doubt, skepticism, a slow, creeping erosion of trust. She refreshed her feed. Nothing changed. The support was fading like smoke in the wind, and the silence from Washington was deafening. Pelosi, Schumer, even Bernie, people who had once stood beside her in solidarity, had distanced themselves without a word. No statements of support, no carefully worded tweets, just absence. AOC had spent years fighting for the movement, believing she was part of something larger, something unbreakable. But now, as she sat in her dimly lit apartment, she felt the cold, sinking realization settle in. She was alone. Then came the final blow. Her phone vibrated, an incoming news alert. She hesitated before clicking, her stomach already tight with dread. Top AOC aide turned state witness in federal investigation. The headline blurred for a moment as she stared at it, her breath caught in her throat. She read it again, forcing herself to process the words. A name, a familiar name, someone she had trusted, someone who had stood in the trenches with her. The article laid it out in brutal detail. A close aide had flipped, cutting a deal with prosecutors, agreeing to provide inside information on the campaign's finances, on her. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. This wasn't just an opponent smear campaign, a partisan attack she could fight. This was different. This was someone who knew her, who had worked alongside her, strategized with her, shared victories and defeats. And now they were handing her over to the wolves. She felt sick. The movement she had built, the foundation of her career, was fracturing beneath her feet. Everything she had poured her heart and soul into, every speech, every rally, every late-night meeting, it was all unraveling. And for the first time in her political career, she felt something she had never allowed herself to feel: doubt. Chapter 5. Patel's Trump Card. Patel unleashed his final blow on Tucker Carlson's show, the most-watched program on cable news. The appearance was carefully choreographed, designed to maximize the impact of his allegations. "In my hands," he declared, holding up a thick file, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction, "is an email signed by AOC, approving illegal transfers of funds from the NYC Traffic Infrastructure Fund to a shell corporation controlled by her campaign." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and damning. The host, Tucker Carlson, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. The audience gasped. Then Patel dropped the bombshell. "A former senior aide is testifying against her. They have provided investigators with first-hand accounts of AOC's involvement in the scheme, confirming her direct knowledge and participation in the illegal activities." AOC felt her world implode. The walls seemed to close in around her, the air suffocating. Someone had betrayed her. Someone she had trusted had stabbed her in the back. The pain was sharp, visceral. The battle was over, and she had lost. Part 2. The Fall from Grace. Chapter 6. The Indictment. The Justice Department made it official. The press conference was carried live across every major network: CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, all of them. The American public watched as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York stood behind a podium, flanked by stern-faced federal prosecutors. The seal of the Department of Justice loomed behind them, a silent declaration of authority. The indictment was read aloud, the charges stacked like bricks in a wall that now stood between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her freedom. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, election fraud, obstruction of justice. Each charge was a hammer blow, each allegation more damning than the last. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, and news anchors spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the gravity of the moment. The words "serious federal offenses" and "significant prison time" were repeated like a grim mantra. This wasn't just a political scandal, it was a reckoning, and it was all happening in real time. The arrest came swiftly. At dawn, federal agents arrived outside her Washington, D.C. apartment, their movements precise and practiced. AOC had known this moment was coming. Her lawyers had warned her, her instincts had told her. But nothing could have prepared her for the sound of fists pounding on her door. She barely had time to process it before the door swung open, revealing a small army of law enforcement. Their faces were impassive, their voices clipped and professional. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, you are under arrest." The words sent an electric charge through the early morning air. She was led outside in handcuffs, the cold steel biting against her wrists. The moment she stepped onto the sidewalk, she was met with an explosion of light, camera flashes firing from every direction, illuminating the scene in stark, unforgiving detail. Reporters shouted over one another, their voices blending into an indecipherable roar. "Alexandria, do you have a statement? Are you guilty? Is this the end of your political career?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. The media frenzy swallowed her whole, the progressive firebrand now reduced to a single, devastating image. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, handcuffed, escorted into a waiting police vehicle, her face set in a mask of defiance and disbelief. That image went viral in seconds. Social media exploded. The photo of her arrest trended worldwide, dissected in real time by journalists, pundits, and political analysts. The progressive icon, the champion of the working class, the voice of a new generation, the congresswoman who had once stared down Wall Street and corporate America, was now the face of a scandal that had consumed everything she had built. Her empire, once fueled by hope and idealism, crumbled beneath the weight of the indictment. Her allies distanced themselves. Her supporters were left in shock. The movement she had ignited had turned against her. The dream had turned into a nightmare, and there was no waking up from this. Ida, Chapter 7, The Trial of the Century. January 2025, New York City. The trial was unlike anything the city had seen in decades. New York became ground zero for what pundits were calling the trial of the century. Swarms of reporters from every major news outlet, CNN, the New York Times, The Guardian, even international networks from Europe and Asia, descended upon the courthouse, eager to document every moment of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's downfall. Cameras lined the streets. Protesters and supporters clashed outside, their chants competing for dominance in the cold winter air. Some still carried signs proclaiming her innocence, while others gleefully declared her a fraud. Late-night comedians feasted on the spectacle. Editorials debated the implications. Social media buzzed with theories, conspiracies, and outrage. And inside the courtroom, history was being made. From the moment the trial began, the atmosphere was electric, charged with tension. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Political figures, celebrities, activists, and journalists packed the benches, watching intently as the prosecution laid out its case. It was meticulous, methodical, devastating. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed former federal judge with a reputation for being relentless, spoke with precision, weaving a damning narrative of fraud, conspiracy, and corruption. The evidence was undeniable, a towering wall of facts that suffocated any room for doubt. The prosecution's case. Financial records traced the missing funds from the NYC Traffic Infrastructure Fund to a network of shell corporations, all linked back to her campaign. The money trail was clear, undeniable, a roadmap of deception. Emails, recovered from her personal server, revealed her direct approval of illegal transactions, contradicting her repeated claims of innocence. The messages were explicit, irrefutable, and left no room for interpretation. Surveillance footage showed her in closed-door meetings with campaign officials and financial advisors, discussing the logistics of laundering money through PACs and nonprofit organizations. The recordings painted a stark picture, one that no carefully crafted political statement could erase. Each day in court, the walls closed in tighter. The prosecution's arguments were crisp, logical, and brutal. Her defense team, once confident, prepared, began to falter. They argued that she was a victim of political persecution, that the evidence was circumstantial, that it was all a carefully orchestrated conspiracy. They claimed the financial transactions were misunderstandings, the emails taken out of context, the surveillance footage misleading, but their words fell flat against the relentless march of evidence. The jury remained impassive, unmoved. By the second week of testimony, it was clear. The defense was unraveling. The final blow came when the prosecution rested its case. The weight of the evidence was overwhelming. Her lawyers had no more cards to play. The jury deliberated for just 48 hours. When they returned, the entire courtroom tensed, holding its collective breath as the verdict was read. Guilty. On all counts. The words echoed through the silent chamber. For a moment, the room was frozen in time, and then chaos erupted. Gasps, shouts, sobs. Reporters scrambled to relay the breaking news. Her supporters wept. Her critics cheered. The nation watched in stunned disbelief as one of the most powerful figures in progressive politics was declared guilty in a court of law. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat motionless, her face expressionless, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't blink. She didn't react. But something in her eyes had changed. This was real now. The reality she had fought against, denied, resisted, it had finally sunk in. The judge wasted no time. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you have been found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. This court must send a clear message that no one is above the law. Then came the final sentence, 5 years in federal prison. The weight of those words crushed whatever remained of her political career. The gavel struck. It was over. As she was led away in handcuffs, her steps slow and deliberate, she stole one last glance at the packed courtroom. The faces blurred, former allies, enemies, strangers all watching as she was taken from the world she had once commanded. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and then she was gone. Part 3. The Twist. Chapter 8. The Secret Witness. 2 weeks before her sentencing, a shocking new witness came forward, a bombshell that threatened to unravel the entire case. His name? Javier Gomez. A former FBI analyst, he had been assigned to the AOC investigation. He had become increasingly disturbed by what he had witnessed, convinced that key documents had been fabricated, that evidence had been manipulated. He had tried to raise his concerns through official channels, but his warnings had been ignored. He had taken copies of key files, evidence of the manipulation. He knew he was risking everything, but he could no longer remain silent. He contacted AOC's legal team, offering to testify under oath. The prosecution was rigged, he told them, his voice trembling with conviction. AOC was set up. Yes, Chapter 9. The appeal. Her legal team pounced on the new evidence. They filed an appeal, arguing that the trial had been unfair, that the prosecution had engaged in misconduct, that AOC had been wrongly convicted. The appeal presented compelling evidence. Emails were doctored, manipulated to implicate AOC in the illegal transfers. Witnesses were pressured, intimidated into providing false testimony. Patel had fabricated financial records, creating a false trail that led to AOC's campaign. The appellate court reviewed the evidence and agreed to reopen the case. The original verdict was vacated, and a new trial was ordered. Chapter 10. The Redemption. Arc 2026. 2 years later, the courtroom was packed once again, but this time the atmosphere was different. There was a sense of hope, of anticipation. The new trial revealed the truth about Patel's actions. Javier Gomez testified, detailing the manipulation of evidence, the coercion of witnesses. Other FBI agents corroborated his testimony. The prosecution's case crumbled. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning a verdict of not guilty. The conviction was overturned. AOC walked out of prison a free woman, and was met, a hero's welcome awaited her. They tried to silence me, to destroy me, to bury me, she declared, her voice ringing with defiance. But I'm still standing, and I will continue to fight for the people who need it. Chapter 11. Patel's Fall. With the case reversed and the truth exposed, Patel was exposed for his malicious actions. The DOJ launched a probe into his misconduct, investigating his role in the fabrication of evidence and the intimidation of witnesses. Within months, Patel was indicted for obstruction of justice, fabrication of evidence, witness tampering. The architect of AOC's downfall now faced his own. The hunter had become the hunted. Chapter 12. A New Dawn. AOC returned stronger than ever. The ordeal had transformed her, hardened her resolve. She was no longer just a congresswoman. She was a symbol of resilience, of perseverance, of the fight against corruption. She launched a new movement, Justice for All, dedicated to fighting for social and economic equality, and ensuring that no one else would suffer the same fate she had. A revolution was reborn. Chapter 13. The Legacy. Years later, historians debated her story endlessly. Was she a corrupt politician who had been framed, or a victim of political sabotage? The truth, as always, was far more complex than either narrative allowed. But one thing was clear. She had changed the game forever. Her story served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of corruption, the power of political manipulation, and the importance of fighting for justice. Chapter 14. The Final Twist. 2028. Election night. AOC stood on a podium, bathed in the glow of television lights, addressing the nation. The crowd roared, their voices a deafening wave of support. 4 years ago, they tried to destroy me, she said, her voice filled with emotion. They tried to silence me, but they failed. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. Now, I stand before you as your next president of the United States. The crowd erupted. Confetti rained down. The dream had been reborn, stronger than ever. She had won. But as she looked out at the cheering crowd, a flicker of unease crossed her face. Had she truly escaped the shadows of the past? Or would they continue to haunt her, even in the highest office in the land? The answer, she knew, remained to be seen.